all the advice that you kind of hear from this person or read about this, or, all of these horror stories of backstabbing or gossiping, or some people even saying, well, you can't have friends on your team, or you can't have friends in your church. And there's just so much of that has been in the ecosystem and in the water that just doesn't sit well with us.
Hey guys, you're listening to The Glass House, hosted by Lifeway. We are Ben and Lindley Mandrell, and we have conversations with leaders who have experienced the stress of ministry and have sensed a spotlight on their personal lives. We want to encourage ministry families and provide a glimpse inside their glass house.
Today on the podcast, we're sharing a conversation we had about loneliness with Daniel and Christina M. They're at Beulah Alliance Church in Alberta, Canada. They recently had a big transition into a lead pastor role.
Huge transition, and Daniel is very vulnerable today, as is Christina, about just how lonely it was to make that change and for him to take the baton of senior leadership. It made me think, Lindley, about a story that I heard once about shortstop, and I'd be interested in hearing your feedback on this.
Okay.
In baseball, one of the hardest positions in the infield is shortstop because grounders come at you hot and strong and speed. And the guy was giving the story. He used to be a college baseball shortstop, and he said, sometimes you take a ball in the face and it hurts. But the most difficult part about playing shortstop is the next time you see that ball coming, to stay in the stance and be willing to take the risk that it might hit you in the face again. One of the stories that Daniel tells here is just how hard it is to trust people after you've been hurt in the ministry. And so I just know for us, it was lonely at times in the ministry because we had people tell us early on, you can't have friends in the ministry.
Right, which we never understood that. I mean, our very first pastor, it was a surprising transition that we were not expecting, and it was a larger church to take for your first church. And the pastor before us, very, very kind man, just said, you need to know it's going to be hard. Relationships will change, and we walked away from that meeting, and we got back in the car and said, well, that won't happen to us. Like, we will be able to just keep up with our friendships. And it happened. I mean, and we were just naive, and what he said happened exactly like he said it.
That's right. And something church members, I don't think fully understand, is just how hard it is for the pastor and his wife to have friends. Early on, we got called the pastor's posse. Because we had a group of friends we hung out with, and it showed up on social media, and those group of people became the pastor's posse. Right. I just remember feeling like, why can everybody else have friends, but if we have them,
right,
it's not fair.
Sure.
So I just think what I love about this conversation today is that Daniel and Christina, they talk about that, and he talks about just he got hurt, and she got hurt, and how do you learn to trust again in ministry? Because you got to trust somebody. All right, well, Daniel and Christina, thanks for being on the show. Today we're talking about loneliness in the glass house, what it's like to just deal with loneliness in ministry. And so thanks for being on.
Awesome.
Thank you so much for having us. And we are so thankful that y'all are talking about this, because I wanted to joke, I've never been lonely before.
Yeah, I'm
but
curious
that's
why
a
you
total
chose
lie.
us for loneliness.
Exactly. I'm like, wait, do we come across as lonely
We watched
people?
your social media, and we just thought they look lonely.
Yeah. Lonely, so lonely. Yeah, I was saying that a million times.
Yeah.
Well, as we get started here, for our listeners who may not know you guys, you've been all over the world in ministry assignments. Describe some of your background and what you've experienced as a couple in ministry.
Sure. So we met on a mission trip through university. I grew up in Vancouver. We're both Canadian, and Christina grew up in Ottawa, so West Coast, East Coast. After getting married, we pastored in Montreal and then Korea, so a couple of years, and then we were in Edmonton for almost 5, and then we were in Nashville working for Lifeway for about 5 years. And then about 2 years ago, we moved back to Edmonton to become the lead pastor, for me to become the lead pastor here.
And how would you describe your first 2 years?
We had, 5 months of non-COVID succession process. It was going to be a no longer than 2-year succession process. The guy I took over from had been leading this 100-year-old church for 30 years and had grown it and was so loved, so trusted. And we were going to do this no longer than 2-year succession process. And then COVID hit. threw a wrench in the whole thing, actually accelerated some things, slowed other things down, and did accelerate the timeline a little bit. But yeah, it's interesting how now that things are opening up, we're really doing the more of the visitation side of things and getting to know the congregation at a heart level. So talking about a glass house, I mean, most of them have only seen us via the stream, right? Or via social media.
Daniel, I'd love to talk a little bit about how you and Christina have adjusted to being in the lead role. I think it's different to be a support staff person than it is the person that is responsible for calling the shots, and it can create some unique loneliness. And, you know, you have hard days where you're sad, where you're dealing with some of your own personal brokenness, and you're called to be, you know, there for everyone else. So how, over the last couple of years, what have you learned? Just be vulnerable with us a little bit about your own self, what you're learning about your own emotions, and how you love others through your own loneliness and challenges.
Yeah. Okay. So, you know, everyone has differing views on the Enneagram, so I'm not going to talk about it much. But on the Enneagram, I am a 3. We're both 3s, which means we're achievers. You know, and we love talking about the achieving side of things, but the flip side of it, right? The shadow side of it is that we are really good at putting on masks. We are really good. 3s are really good at compartmentalizing emotions and just tucking it away and just you know, the train, nothing, and no one's going to stop this train from going ahead. So that's our default, and we've had to learn a lot about, okay, how do we slow down? How do we process? So even in our counseling, it's been that sense of, okay, how do we process this? How do we be vulnerable to one another? So the interesting thing is we are each other's best friends. Like, and we'll ask this constantly. And I think in the back of my mind, at least, it's like, yeah, we should have other best friends too. But I mean, it's hard, especially living in this glass house. It's hard to be vulnerable and trust others. And then added on to that, I've been a pastor for 15 years, and all the advice that you kind of hear from this person or read about this, or, you know, all of these horror stories of backstabbing or gossiping, or some people even saying, well, you can't have friends on your team, or you can't have friends in your church. And there's just so much of that has been in the ecosystem and in the water that just doesn't sit well with us. So for us, we're like, okay, are we just being incredibly naive to think that we could be really good friends with our team, that we could have completely vulnerable, trusting relationships with others in our church? Now, obviously, we don't do that with the first person that we meet, right? That time tells. Obviously, there's this long-term perspective of, okay, I've known you for several years. I now know your character. Your character isn't what you say it is. It's what you show it is, right? And we know that we've discerned that when we've grown in those trusting relationships. But for us, it's honestly this: how do we intentionally choose to be vulnerable at appropriate levels, depending on the length of the relationship, and do that within our context? So that's been the journey that we've been on.
And I think both Daniel and I, too, in the journey of doing this baton pass in succession, I have been, probably in the last 5 months, a lot has happened too, that I used to be quite vulnerable on social media. But now that we are really living it with people's lives, I feel like I don't have the energy to be vulnerable on social media, because I choose to be vulnerable with people who are face to face with me.
That's really well said.
That's good.
And at first, because, you know, we have a podcast, we have a platform, and it came down to, I was just praying before God, and I was like, I am depleted. I don't have much to give. And really just feeling like the Holy Spirit is just like, you need to dig deep. The further your reaches, the deeper you need to dig into the Word and dig into me. And so that's when I was like, you know, it's okay. We don't, you know, if we're not going to pay so much attention to the platform that we have on social media, that is okay, because we really want to invest our energy and our time and our vulnerability into the people that we are caring for here.
Another piece of this conversation that I thought was so interesting is when Daniel talks about the shadow side of who they are is that they tend to put on masks and monitor perception. It made me think about the passage where Jesus says, do not be like the hypocrites who stand in the synagogues and love to be seen, or pray with many words. Do not be like the hypocrites. Well, that word in the Greek is one who puts on a mask. And in ministry, we want to be transparent and vulnerable and real, and yet it's almost like the system is set up that we can't admit that we're lonely.
Right.
So I just know in our history, like there have been moments when you felt like I was wearing a mask with you as a pastor. I wasn't even being totally real with you, and that hurts.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, we say in this life, in Christian life, think with your head and not your heart. Don't be mastered by your feelings. And so we feel like we should be able to kind of head knowledge ourselves out of feelings. And so, but that tends to lead towards loneliness. I mean, you don't feel close with your spouse, because there have been times where I know something's wrong with Ben. I know by his mannerisms something's wrong. I just your spouse so well. And then I go to ask him what's going on, and he, out of protection, doesn't want to tell me. And he's like, no, I'm fine. Everything's fine. But really, I mean, that's just a form of hypocrisy in that he's not fine, but he feels like he can't share it with me.
Totally. I mean, years ago, I heard a guy preach this passage at a pastor's conference, guard your heart, for it is the wellspring of life, and said, gentlemen, some of you are going home every night and you're poisoning your wife's heart. By pouring out all the stuff you're dealing with at church, you're poisoning her heart. And I remember thinking, that's the kind of guy I'm going to be. I'm going to protect my wife from poisoning her heart. When I have done that in the past as a pastor, it injures our relationship, because then I carry burdens that I don't give you access to.
Well, I suspect there are different types of relationships. And some women out there, that's probably true. There are probably some who don't necessarily want to know. They can't handle it, or it hurts their feelings more. But I just know for us, Daniel referred to the Enneagram. I mean, I'm an 8. I'm a challenger. And so I need that information. Like that's how I feel close to people. And that's how I feel loyal to Ben, is that I can know his burdens and really have his back and really pray for him.
And part of being close is we're taking this hill together. And a lot of that just requires transparency and vulnerability about what we're trying to do, challenges we're facing. So I thought it was an interesting part, and I hope that our listeners get a lot out of that. Let's ask a follow-up question here, because this is hitting close to home. Last night, Lindley and I had what I would call a friendly debate about the fact that I don't ever share my feelings. Like, I'll give her the rundown of the day, but I won't actually be confessional or vulnerable. It's just not in my nature. I have to, literally think consciously, what can I share that sounds very unmanly right now?
Well, and I would say,
I'm afraid, or I feel ashamed, or those are not natural statements.
The hard part is that we talk a lot, and so we've been trying to work on things through our counseling. And he says, to say I feel blank, and so last night I said I feel lonely, and he said, I don't understand. I'm here during the day. I'm telling you what my meetings are. I'm going through all these things, and I'm like, but that doesn't. I don't feel connected to you. I don't want the rundown. I want to feel connected to you, because similarly to you guys, there is a place of we are best friends, and you have to have that person in ministry a lot of times. And so I'm like, I need to feel a connection with you.
Yeah. Well, and I'm like, I'm being as vulnerable with you as I am with everybody. I'm this shallow with everyone.
Yeah, I was like, well.
Okay, it's interesting. When I was in seminary, I had to do a counseling course, and it was one counseling. Okay, I think all seminaries, if you're going into pastoral ministry, you need more than one counseling course.
Yes.
Agreed, yes.
Yes.
But I had the one counseling course, and I had the option of either, for my final project, either writing a paper on some sort of counseling methodology, or getting 6 sessions of counseling and journaling about it. So I was like, I'm getting counseling. I remember thinking halfway through, wow, I am killing this. And this is my achiever. I'm like, I'm probably the best person this person has ever counseled.
You are the picture of vulnerability.
Exactly. Because I came, first session, I came with the plan. I knew what I wanted to talk about. I wanted to fix this. I wanted to do this. And then halfway through, literally, she yelled, and I don't know if counselors are supposed to yell at their patients, but she yelled at me. All right, and she said, I don't care what you have to think. I'm asking you how you feel.
Yeah.
And unbeknownst to me, she had been constantly, every single session, trying to get to my feelings. And she had been asking me how I feel. And I had been just responding with, well, I think. And it's just all the way up here.
I think we have the same counselor.
So last Friday,
He yells at me.
at least 3 times, Ben said, "Well, I think I feel this, or I probably am thinking that," and I'm like, "What? Are you doing it, or are you not?" Like,
Well, and then I cut that word. I cut that word out, and the next statement I just said, "I feel this way," and he said, "Didn't that feel better? Like, didn't you feel like true to yourself when you said that?"
Exactly.
And the
Yeah.
other thing too is like I am a person that tries to fix things through strategies, and when
Yes.
you're talking about feelings, you're not talking about trying to fix anything. It just is what it is. I
Right.
feel blank. It's a language I'm still trying to figure out how to speak. To
Oh,
Lindley
we are
because she
too.
feels very lonely.
Yeah,
Well,
definitely.
And I love how you use the word language, because when it comes to feelings, I'm like a preschooler, right? I feel
Yeah.
angry. I feel happy.
It's like your primary
I feel,
colors, right?
Yes, I only have 4 emotions, and it's just it.
Or
which
4
is,
words
Yeah,
for
4
emotions.
words, which
Yeah.
isn't true. And I try to rationalize it. I try to say it. So actually, Christina. She's Gottman certified, and she actually brought one of her assignments home and printed out this wheel.
It's a feeling
Yeah,
wheel,
yeah.
right? And so we literally
Oh,
have
that's
it
great.
laminated and on our fridge in our kitchen. And so we use it usually for the kids in terms of when they're
Yeah.
writing. And so instead of being able to have more language to put into their writing, but it's really worked well for Daniel and I because I can sense something is up, and I'm like, "Baby, what's up?" Oh,
Like,
nothing.
oh.
It's nothing. I'm like, okay, well, he'll tell me something. I'm like, how do you feel about that?
Yeah. And
I don't know.
And then she pulls out the wheel,
I'm like,
and I'm
"Can you
like
choose
rolling
3?"
my eyes. I don't want to do
Yeah,
this.
3
Like,
emotions
I
from
need
this
this
wheel.
wheel.
Can you say
Can
it?
you email me that wheel tonight, please?
We will.
But you know what?
Definitely.
And as much as I facetiously roll my eyes, and I'm like, no, I don't need this. I'm fine. My emotions are good. I'm not like, I'll pause, and I see the way that Christina is sincerely asking me. And then I remember the first time I did it, because I was like, this is dumb. Like, this is honestly, what is this going to do?
Well, I think it was really about processing your finding out your dad has cancer.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Yeah.
And then just
Wow.
like reading through all the emotions, and then I started talking, right? And I was like, okay, you know what? I actually feel this, or I feel anxious, or I feel, and whatever that is. And it actually opened up quite the conversation for us that I don't think we could have gone with my primary color emotions.
That's really good.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting when we talk about loneliness, and that we assume, like within the glass house, that we're all husband and wife are always on the same page, but that we're lonely from other people. But that's what's been interesting in our counseling journey, is that being in the glass house can create loneliness even within the couple.
Oh, completely.
When he knows about something going on, or I know something, and we feel like we can't maybe get on the same page with that.
I would love to ask a question related to something you said earlier that I have never heard talked about. And that is, you mentioned that you two are best friends. Well, best friends share everything. Have you guys struggled with what level of information you should share about stuff going on at church? Like, Dan, do you tend to kind of like protect her from certain information that in the end makes her feel cheated, like she got left out of a part of your life?
Yeah, that's a new one for me, because this is my first time as a lead pastor, and I mean the church's pre-COVID was 3,000 to 4,000 on a weekend, and the weight of responsibility. Like, I have never ever felt the weight of responsibility that I felt that I feel today, and I'm so grateful for our elders and for our leadership team and the way that God has called them here as well. But you're right. I mean, there's so much going on, right? And as a lead, you know everything, and you kind of have to be privy to everything in a sense. But the interesting thing about our relationship is, even if I want to try to hide something, I can't. Like, Christina just
It's
knows.
like you ate at a Mexican restaurant and she can smell it.
Yes. Yeah. So it's actually been a learning opportunity for both of us to say, okay, yeah, I am going to share the information as it comes up and as it relates to us, or I know things about people's marriages that, yeah, if we're not going to actually connect with them or minister to them, then yeah, I'm not going to bring it up, just dinner table conversation.
Yeah, this is not like a gossip fest or anything.
Exactly.
Right.
But if it relates to the ministry or if it relates to certain things, yeah, it is this conversation for us to be like, okay, this is like, this needs to stay just here. Like, this is after the kids go to bed. Christina, we got to pray about this together, or we need to process this together. And other pieces being like, oh no, we could just talk about it because it's not that big of a deal. Yeah. But we've had to figure out that line because it's, yeah.
Well, I think it's always a
love
tension. It will always
Yeah.
be a tension of that. And there's going to be times where I'm sure I'm going to need to put up a boundary and be like, babe, I can't hear that right now. I am not in this space to be able to process that or to even be in the right mindset to really pray about it instead of being like, yeah, I'll just pray about it. Like really, 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 really get on our knees and pray about it. And so, it is going to be an ebb and flow. And I think if we're okay and are able to say that it will always be a tension and be able to respect that in each other, then I'm hoping that it will work with that. So
That's great.
yeah, and there's gonna be times where Daniel really he needs to get it off his chest, right? And needs to be able to help process that, and then we'll work it through.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't want to be the only person who knows something.
Right.
Right. I mean, we know that sin, and that's whether, I mean, I'm not talking about sin, but it applies to sin as well. Right. I mean, it grows in the darkness, right? It grows in isolation and even information too. It's like, yeah, I don't want to be the only person who knows this. We're called to carry one another's burdens, right? And yes, Jesus says, come to me, all you who are weary and heavy, burdened, and I will give you rest. Take up my yoke upon you. I'm gentle and humble in heart, right? He says that. And yes, we do have to always, because I think sometimes, we go to people instead of, the foot of the cross. And yeah, we do need to give it to Jesus, but we are called as a community to carry one another's burdens.
One of the things that we learned in ministry was that when we became friends with somebody, we almost had to have like a talk with them, like the talk, just to define the relationship kind of moment.
Orientation.
Because it was hard for them. We had relationships change because once we became in a role of leadership, other people would come to them to get information about us. And they didn't know how to deal with that. And, so even some of our closest friends now, people don't even know because they've kept it quiet. So I have one good friend specifically who people will tell her information about us, not knowing that she and I talk all the time, which is in a way kind of hard. I mean, it feels like, gosh, people can't even admit they're good friends with us. So it makes you feel like, well, what's wrong with us? But on the other hand, it's just protection for us.
I always felt like when we had those conversations that we were saying, hey, by the way, we're high maintenance friends.
When we were in Korea for 2 years. We thought we were going to be there longer. We had just, we had never lived outside of Canada long term. And first year we were there, we rented a fully furnished apartment, and then we had a baby. And then the second year we found an apartment, we started furnishing it ourselves, and it's like, wow, this is great. I mean, the ministry is growing. We had great friends, and we're like, yeah, this is just so great. And then we had a huge fallout, and he was my mentor, and I'd known this guy and looked up to him for
Years.
For so long, and the enemy in his sneaky ways just got into our relationship and just started stealing, killing, destroying, dividing, and conquering, and just totally broke our relationship. It's taken a couple of years. It took a couple of years to get to the point of, okay, I forgive you, and they forgive us, but our relationship, we don't talk to each other. And that's something that we've had to give to God. The interesting thing, though, is afterwards, the last thing I ever wanted to do was trust anyone other than Christina.
That's grief.
And it took, this is, 11 years ago, and it's still a process to be like, yeah, you know what, I was probably way quicker to trust back then, and maybe it was age too, but I mean, the guy was my mentor, right? I would share absolutely everything with him, And I'm now a lot slower to trust, but I've learned that you got to take baby steps, and you got to go, because you could live out of reaction to the past, right, and be stuck in chains to that, right? But you're not your past.
We like to ask 2 questions at the end of the Glass House podcast, and Lindley's going to throw the first one at you.
Yeah, so in regards to ministry, what has been the hardest part of living in the Glass House for you guys?
I think it kind of goes back to our core motivation in being achievers and wanting to look the part and be excellent, and social media doesn't help with that. Right? Because most of the time the shadow side of threes are, image management, and we're really good at that. Like, unfortunately, we're really good at that. But I think that's where the whole going deeper with a few has helped so much.
Yeah, very much so. For me, it's the mama bear. It's that there's a part of me that is willing to, people can say whatever they want to me, and I'll pretend that I'm the 3, right? I'll pretend that I'm totally okay with that, and then I'll kind of cry in the background and have to deal with that. But if someone were to say something to my children that I did not agree with and that was not edifying to them, there's this whole inner volcano that I feel like I really need to lay before God, or I will explode.
Yeah, because there's this justice.
Oh my goodness.
Thing.
Don't you dare speak lies to my children. And
they're not being malicious.
No, not at all.
But it's these side comments, either cultural baggage.
Yeah, you shouldn't be wearing that. Oh, no, let's not go there. Like one of those, just these expectations that I know we have upon us, but that our children don't necessarily know. And there's a part of a naivety to me that wants to protect them of that. And then it's turning to, God has been reminding me I am their heavenly Father, and broken people, we are ministering to broken people. We are broken people ourselves. And so praying that literally that if there are lies that they are hearing, that they would not take root, that we would know that we are children of God. We are made in his image, and just continuing to speak truth and life into them, and love, and that, hey, we are safe people, mommy and daddy really are for you. They're not against you. And that there's brokenness. You will hear things. People will have expectations of you that are that we don't have expectations about you, and that. And even if you do sin, we are all sinners, that there is grace and redemption before God.
Yeah. And not living in chains to other people's expectations.
Yes.
And deriving joy or sorrow from them as well, right? Because being in the glass house, it's everyone is going to think whatever they want to think, and there's so much baggage that's causing them to think and react and all that, and it does come down to those expectations. So even for us, learning and modeling that, honestly, and someone asked me, they're like, what are you going to do? Or I've gotten these comments, well, this is a big ship. Do you know what you're doing? Right? And just all of these big questions that I just respond. I'm like, you know what? I don't, honestly, there's moments where I don't know what I'm doing, but I know God has called me here. Without a shadow of a doubt, I know that God has called us here.
Yep.
And I'm learning and I'm growing.
Here's the question we want to end on a high note. With all the challenges of living in the glass house, what's the most rewarding part? Why is it worth it?
I think there's twofold to that. One is that Daniel shared already that God has really called us to this, and we know in his kindness, he has shown us without a shadow of a doubt, time and time again, that this is where we're supposed to be. And so to be able to walk in that calling and to be able to, he doesn't need us, right? He doesn't need to use us. And yet in his grace and kindness, he allowed us to be a part of this. And so that's amazing to be able to be in his presence and to be able to share just the redemption story and the reconciliation and the fact that he loves people so much that he time and time again pursues them, and to be able to share that with people is incredible. Yeah. The second part of that is that yes, it is hard, but we get to also see the the body of Christ work together, right? Rejoice with those who rejoice, mourn with those who mourn. And yes, that can be tiresome and hard many times. There's also just such a joy factor to that as well, that we really do get to show other people that we are Christians by our love, right?
Yeah, the interesting thing about most people, and this is the interesting thing about the Glass House, it's almost like you're on a TV show, right? It's almost like you're on this reality Truman Show, where everyone sees. Yeah, you're right. And part of it is, man, are you waking up early enough so that while all the watchers are sleeping, you're having intimate moments with Jesus?
Yes.
Right? Are you having intimate moments with your spouse? And, there are those rooms, those prayer closets or the bedrooms, doors closed, we're not, and no one can look inside here. And I think that's so important so that we're not faking it, right? So that we're not, because we're always on display in that way. The joy of that is when you look at the ratio of negative to positive or uplifting, Jesus glorifying, Jesus honoring content out there to all the ways that we love to tear others down and what is hot in the media and all of that, we have the opportunity to lend hope to other people.
The Glass House is a production of Lifeway Christian Resources. It's hosted by Ben and Lindley Mandrell, executive produced by Joy Allman, produced and edited by Angie Elkins, original music by Robert Elkins, and graphic design by Cameron Spooner.
Thanks for listening to The Glass House, where we hope to shed light on the dark places of ministry, one conversation at a time.